let's talk housing. The UK's housing is apparently the worst value for money of any advanced economy. This is looking at things like the size of the property, so square footage, the ages of the property, what you're getting for your bang for your buck, really. Where are you on why you think this is the case?
Well, I think that these findings are potentially taken slightly out of context, that on the expense side, they estimated because the UK has so many more home owners than the countries it was being compared to. They couldn't compare costs.
Yeah.
But our housing stock is clearly limited, and that has been inflated in cost because we haven't allowed more houses to be built. And we have got to... Government after government has said, we will build 100,000 houses a year, 300,000 houses a year, and it never happens, whilst our population does nothing but grow.
Yeah, but why is it not happening?
Because we need a massive reform of planning laws. The planning system in this country is so over-regulated, it is so overcomplicated, and we should be encouraging people to be able to build small developments, not just the clever big landowners who want to build 200 homes, 5,000 homes, and can jump through all the hoops that are put in the way of building houses, that inflate the cost of building those houses, and so along with restricting in supply, inflate further the cost to everyone of living in them.
James?
So I agree with some of that, and we do need more houses to be built, and there are reforms to planning that could help do that. But if anybody says, and most of the debate on this issue seems to only focus on the number of houses that can be built, as if the number of homes per capita had been falling massively in this country, which actually it hasn't. I mean, and if you look at comparable countries, we're at the lower end of the range, but we're not, our per capita ones is a bit lower than the Netherlands, for example, which is a pretty densely populated, small country near us, similar levels of wealth, and so on. So there are other issues for why we have such extremely expensive housing. And it is extremely expensive. The average rent is something like £1,300 a month. Tenants in the last year that there are records for, 2022, paid £89 billion in rent to landlords. This is, that's money that people aren't saving for their deposit to buy their own home, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of big policy interventions that are required. The first is to have many more social housing, rent at social rent, keeping that down. The second is there needs to be private sector rent controls. It's not possible to carry on rising at the rate. The third is there need to be strong tax disincentives towards holding property only for investment and it not being used for homes, which is one of the things that you see. And one of the ways in which you could fund these policies wouldn't involve raising taxes or anything like that at all. There's over £4 billion which are in tenants' deposits, private sector tenants, their deposits, which are registered with a tenancy deposit scheme. You could take that money and use that to capitalise a housing policy bank, which could then lend to councils to build, to developers to build homes, which could be used for if you wanted, for mortgages if mortgage rates were going up, or to subsidise things. And you could use that bank to capitalise a housing policy bank to deliver the kinds of quantity of house building that we need in the types of tenure that we need.
So you're going to take the tenants' deposits,
yeah,
and you're going to be lending those on a much longer term basis, because a lot of tenancies are quite short term tenancies.
So you take the deposits as a whole,
yeah,
which is over £4 billion.
Yeah.
And say when I move out of my flat, I'll get my deposit back, but someone else will move into my flat and they'll put the deposit in. So it's a stable amount, which you then use as your capitalisation to lend out.
Some people will be saying it sounds a bit like a glorified Ponzi scheme that does to people.
No, that's not. It's not a Ponzi scheme in the slightest. What you're doing?
It's not risk-free. But if we had rent controls, no one would rent out houses because they'd still have to cover the repairs, the mortgages, all the other costs associated with renting out a property, buying it in the first place, and there would be no landlords because they wouldn't be able to cover their costs. And that would make it harder for all the tenants, not easier by any stretch of the imagination. The UK does have one of the smallest per capita housing stocks, as you mentioned, that if you look at comparable countries in Europe, second homes account for 22% in Spain, 17% in Finland, 9% in France. We've only got 4%, and yet there is so much discussion on penalising second homeowners because they're using up an extra house. I don't have two houses, if in case declare no interest in this one at all. But we actually have a very small number of them compared to the other developed countries. And we do just need to build more.
There's a couple of different factors that we're not discussing. Greed. You know, when you look at properties that are up for sale at the moment and you actually look at the asking price of the current property and then you look at the purchase price and the gulf between the two, and I can't help but wonder what is driving this sale price other than greed of an estate agent trying to maximise their commission, and of course, understandable, some might say, profit motivation of the person doing the selling. Also, as well, something I worry about is these HMOs, there's companies like Serco now popping up, offering very lucrative tenancies to tenants like asylum seekers, where you're taking properties now, you're splitting them into multiple dwellings. I think that, personally, is a recipe for disaster for a number of reasons. What do you think to the housing situation, GB Views? At gbnews.com.